السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. وبعد. Inshallah, we'll be picking up from where we left off in the Tafsir of Surah al Hujarat. We stopped at the 8th verse, was the last verse we did. فَضْلٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَنِعْمَةً وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. A bounty from Allah and a blessing, and Allah is all-knowing and all-wise. And this is referring to the, we said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving, making حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمْ, making Iman beautiful in their hearts. Making them love Iman, endeared in their hearts, وَزَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ, and He made it beautiful in their hearts. So that was the previous verses, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to say, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَاصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمْ فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَى الْأَمْرِ اللَّهِ فَإِن فَاءَتْ فَاصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَاقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. This is a longer verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and if two groups from amongst the believers fight one another, then try to make peace between them. If one of them continues to wrong the other, then fight him till he returns to the command of God. If he returns, then reconcile between the two parties fairly and justly. Verily, God loves justice. So, there's a couple of reasons why this verse was revealed. There's actually 3 that I found. The first has to do with a story between the Prophet ﷺ and the famous leader of the hypocrites named Abdullah ibn Ubay. Now, the Prophet ﷺ was walking. He was riding on a donkey, and there was a Ansari, a companion who was from Medina, born in Medina. He didn't migrate. He was born there, who was walking with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ had his donkey, and the Ansari was walking with him, and they came across Abdullah ibn Ubay, and Abdullah ibn Ubay was with a few people who were friends of his. Keep in mind, Abdullah ibn Ubay had a lot of power in Medina before the Prophet ﷺ came. And then there were still Sahaba from the Ansar, from the people who lived in Medina, that still had relationships with Abdullah ibn Ubay. Even though he was a known munafiq, they still had relationships with him, and he was still someone of very noble lineage from their families. So, but Abdullah ibn Ubay was a known munafiq. And when he saw the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Stay away from me, your donkey stinks." And the Ansari responded with, "By God, you smell worse than the Prophet ﷺ's donkey." And that was a serious insult. And the Ansari and the people who were with Abdullah ibn Ubay wound up fighting each other. They said they wound up fighting with slippers. You'll find in every single scenario, for some reason, they're fighting with slippers. They just pull their chanclas off in the middle of the street and start hitting each other. I don't know why. But that's how they were fighting. And so, according to this story, there were some companions from amongst the group with Abdullah ibn Ubay that were walking with Abdullah ibn Ubay, and they wound up fighting with the Ansar. That's the first one. The second one is that there was a conflict between the 2 tribes that were in Medina, the Aus and the Khazraj, and there was a dispute about them that wound up reaching. There was so much tension that they actually wound up fighting each other, not with weapons, but once again with slippers. So, a little background on who the Aus and the Khazraj are. the Aus and the Khazraj were the two original Arab tribes in Medina before the Prophet ﷺ came. And these two tribes were rivals. And they would make alliances with the three Jewish tribes that lived on the outskirts of Medina. They lived on the border of Medina in the fortresses. They would make treaties with those Jewish tribes, and they would fight each other all the time. So one Khazraj would have these allies, the Aus would have these allies, and they were constantly fighting each other. And even after Islam, you have to understand that Islam comes and it removes a lot of these things, but these things are still baggage that the Sahaba have. They haven't completely erased the tensions that existed, because people were seriously injured, people were killed, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of emotions involved in this rivalry between the Aus and the Khazraj that existed. So, according to this, the second reason for revelation, and this one was that for some reason the Aus and the Khazraj once again were arguing over something, and it resulted in them fighting each other, and then this verse was revealed. The third one is that there was an argument between two Sahaba inside the masjid, and they were arguing, and at that time the floor in the masjid was rocks. It was like pebbles and dirt. So they kept their chanclas on. They kept their slippers on. And once again, they grabbed their chanclas and started fighting each other in the masjid. And then this was revealed. So there's three different reasons for the verse being revealed. There are a couple of things I want to talk about regarding the actual verse itself. And this has to do with people who get wronged. Right? This is a little bit of a side point. When people are wronged or in an argument, there's three things they tend to do. One, they try to find a way to seek justice as they perceive it. Note that, as they perceive it. So, someone insults you, you seek justice as you perceive justice by trying to fight the guy. Right? Or, they seek justice from an authority, but it's some way of trying to seek some sort of justice. Right? In this world. So either they try to physically do it with their own hands, or they try to contact someone to do it for them, contact the authorities to enact justice for them. The second one is the person who is angry. He doesn't fight you, but he keeps his anger and suspends judgment to the day of judgment. The spiteful person. He doesn't fight you and try to demand justice right now in the dunya, but he keeps his anger, never forgives you, and waits till the day of judgment for you to get your punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's the third one, and that is the best option, and that is to forgive the person. Right? Though the other three options, the first one, depending on how you approach it, could be wrong. But to seek justice in this world is not wrong by any means. And a great example of this is how Islam deals with murder. You can seek justice immediately by demanding blood money, or you can forgive, and one is not wrong. Demanding the blood money is not wrong, right? It is permissible, it's allowable, it's okay, but to forgive is better. And this is a important thing within Islam, where there's things that they're not wrong, but there's a better. And we're always trying to do the better. That's what ihsan is. Trying to do better. Ihsan, the word hasan means to be good or beautiful. Ahsana, when you put it on the verb form, ahsana yuhsinu ihsan, it means to be as best as possible and as beautiful as possible. Right? So a muhsin is someone who is as beautiful and as the best iman they're trying to be the best of people. That is the muhsin. It's one of the attributes of the muhsin, right? And also you'll hear in hadith when the Prophet ﷺ says that believers should have ihsan in everything that they do. You should try to be as beautiful and as perfect in everything that they do. And one of the more beautiful things is when you're confronted with a situation to try to calm yourself down and forgive the person as opposed to demanding some sort of justice. So, another thing I want to highlight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَاصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُم. If two groups from amongst the believers fight each other, فَاصْلِحُوا. Try to reconcile between the two. This reconciling between the two, the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned numerous times in the hadith as being a form of sadaqah. In one hadith, it's a very famous hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, and it's in the Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, Riyadh al-Salihin, it's in a bunch of books. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is reported to have said, كُلُّ سُلَامَيْ مِنَ النَّاسِ عَلَيْهِ صَدَقَةً كُلَّ يَوْمٍ تَطْلُعُ فِيهِ الشَّمْسِ تَعْدِلُ بَيْنَ الْإِثْنَيْنِ صَدَقَةً. He says every joint in the body must perform an act of charity. Alay, when you see, sometimes you'll see the word ala, right? Usually it means to be on top. But sometimes it means to be, it means to be mandatory. There's actually a word that's dropped. You'll find this in Arabic. There will be words that are just dropped, a verb that will be dropped. But the pronoun, the phrase that goes back to it will be mentioned. And you just have to know, based on context, what that means. So he says, upon every joint, or mandatory for every joint, is to perform an act of charity every day that the sun rises. And then he goes to say the first thing he mentions in that hadith is to reconcile between two people that are in a dispute is a form of sadaqah. And note the importance of trying to reconcile. And you notice frequently that instead of trying to reconcile issues, we either try to hype them up or we whip out our phones and put it on Instagram. I'm telling you, you see it all the time. There was one time there was a fight between two people, and people came you wouldn't even know that they were there. It seemed like they just, like ants when they just come from the middle of nowhere. Like, where did the ants come from? People just came out and all of a sudden started recording. This happens all the time. But what we as Muslims should be doing is not trying to record it and incite the people. We should be trying to calm them down and distance them and try to reconcile between the two parties. Because most likely, both parties have been wrong somehow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَاصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخْوَيْكُمْ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say, verily the believers are siblings, so reconcile between your siblings when there's conflict, and have taqwa in Allah, that perhaps you will receive mercy. This sibling relationship that we have is a very important relationship. Throughout, you're going to notice the majority of the verses we're going to deal with today are going to deal with adab and etiquettes regarding the believers and their relationships. So we started off with what happens when there's fighting, and we're going to go on and we're going to see that there's more things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us about. Because, to be honest, let's be real, siblings fight. Siblings fight. It's just what they do. And the Muslim community is no different from a family of brothers and sisters. In fact, we're not even as closely related as actual brothers and sisters, right? And sometimes we'll have frequently, we'll have less tolerance than we would have with our real brothers and sisters, right? But when you're trying to do work in the community, tempers are going to flare. When you're just being in the community, people will be wronged, people will be insulted, whatever. People will be frustrated with something's not happening fast enough, something's happening to, something's not happening the way they thought it should happen, miscommunication with this, and that. It happens. It just does. Right? This surah, this whole surah, it's called Surah Ta'deeb, the surah of etiquette, for a reason, and because so many of its verses highlight this. So this brotherhood, it's very important. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you has iman, meaning perfect, true iman, right? Until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. He loves for his brother what he loves for himself. No, love. Hub means love. It's translated frequently as like, because there's no real word that the Arabs use for like. For example, you'll see if you look in the books of Shama'ili, you'll hear they'll use the word hub and talk about, like, Prophet ﷺ used to like to eat squash. That is the usage of like, right? Like, Prophet liked to eat squash. But they use the same word, hub, right? Here in this hadith, it's not hub like I like to eat squash. No, it's hub like hub for the Prophet ﷺ, love of the Prophet ﷺ, or love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's love. This emotion that binds us together. Okay? So you should love for your brother, not just want it. If you love something for someone, you put extra effort into hoping that they get it. I like to, I like this, I like this company, right? But if you really love that company, you're going to tell everybody about it. If you really love for your brothers what you love for yourself, or love for your sisters what you love for yourself, then you are going to make an active effort to make sure that we're all in this together. Another point I want to make, the word la'alla, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, perhaps that you will receive mercy. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. When you see, many mufassirs will say, when you see لَعَلَّ, the word perhaps, or, لَعَلَّ is, we'll just stick with لَعَلَّ. When you use the word, when you see the word لَعَلَّ in the Quran, referring to something good, the ulama usually say that this is a promise, okay? And that it's just a usage in rhetoric, right? It's just an aspect of beautiful language to use la'alla in that particular case. And if it's la'alla referring to punishment, then usually they'll say that this is referring to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive or He can punish. He has there's nothing that forces Him to forgive or to punish. So, a point that I want to make, okay, because I mentioned that la'alla is usually referring to a promise. Whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making promises, right, it must be remembered that there's no guarantee that your physical doing of the action, like, for example, I'll give you an example. There are two people who are arguing, and I come in and I break up the argument, right? Will I get rewarded to the full extent? Will I get the promise that comes in the Quran? Well, the reality is that all of our actions in terms of the reward which we are going to get are based on our intentions. So you can do an act that's considered meritorious, that has all these hadith or ayat talking about the reward you're going to get, and then you could come up on the day of judgment and look and realize you didn't get half of what those promises were. Why? Because your intention wasn't correct. Niyyah is key. Intention is key. There in the hadith, right? The hadith, the famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? Verily, actions are based on intentions. There is an omitted word. This happens, by the way, frequently in Arabic. There's an omitted word that binniyat, with intention, goes back to. Right? Some say that it's completion, but many say that the word that it goes back to is reward. Verily, you are rewarded according to your intentions. So if you have a bad intention, you're not going to be rewarded. If you have intention that's shaky, you're not going to be rewarded the same way as you have an intention that is firm. So our niyyah is important. Our niyyah is important. It determines how we are rewarded. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِّسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنَّ وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, men should never insult one another. Perhaps they may be better than the other. And women should not insult other women. Perhaps they may be better than the other. And do not insult one another and do not call each other by wicked names. Wicked are insulting names after belief, and the one who does not repent verily is amongst the wrongdoers. So, once again, we're going to look into the sabab al-nuzul, the reason for this verse being revealed. Why was this verse revealed? Well, some ulama say this verse was revealed once again about the people of Tamim. Remember the delegation that came with the foolish leader? Well, when the people of Tamim came to Medina, they noticed in the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ people who were not wealthy, and they were insulting them. Look, you guys are so poor. You guys stay in the Masjid all day long and so poor, whatever. And amongst the people they insulted, there were two people, Ammar bin Yasir and Suhaib al-Rumi. Especially, I want to talk about Ammar bin Yasir just because he's a very forgotten Sahabi. And there's a couple aspects about him that are forgotten. And I think one of the most important aspects about him is his lineage, right? Look at Ammar bin Yasir. Ammar bin Yasir, subhanallah, has the privilege of saying, my mother was the first martyr in Islam and my father was the second. My mother was the first martyr, period, and of course that makes her the first female, and my father was the first male martyr. Subhanallah. And they were tortured horribly. Abu Jahl, all the Sahaba were tortured. But depending on who was torturing, it would be different levels. And they were, because Ammar and his family, they did not have a tribe to protect them. Sumayya, Ammar's mother, was a slave. And this is important too. She was a slave, and she was an African slave, and his father was Arab, so he was mixed. He was mixed ethnically. We tend to forget that. We always talk about Bilal, radiallahu anhu, because you know he was Habashi and so on and so forth, and he's very important. But also, don't forget that there were other Sahaba that were also dark skinned. It wasn't just Bilal and then everybody else was, Arabs from Yemen and things like that. No. There were also mixed ones. There was all different ethnicities from the Sahaba. And Ammar bin Yasir was mixed. He was mixed. And he was mixed, and he was tortured by Abu Jahl, and it was horrible torture. And the reason why he was able, subhanAllah, to be able to get out, Abu Jahl went and he took an axe and he put it on coals until it was white hot and pressed it against Ammar's chest, burning his skin. And he kept applying it, telling Ammar to curse the Prophet ﷺ and call him a liar. And Ammar refused, and he kept putting it, and eventually Ammar said that the Prophet ﷺ was lying. And Ammar, he was set free because he was imprisoned, and he was crying because it was such a horrible thing he had said, and he was afraid, for saying such a horrible thing. And it's regarding him that the verse about saying things that you do not actually mean when under duress, when being threatened, is permissible. So saying things that would typically lead to kufr, but if you're forced to do it, right? But by force, not I'm afraid. No, forced. Okay, he had a burning piece of metal pressed against his chest. Then it is permissible for you to say those things. So this is a very important person. He has a noble lineage, subhanAllah. His lineage was made noble by the Islam. That's another beautiful point about his lineage. He comes from a beautiful lineage, and on top of that, he had a verse revealed regarding a circumstance that he went through. Not every Sahabi can say that. And so, but they were making fun of him because he was not wealthy. And they were also making fun of Suhaib al-Rumi. Suhaib al-Rumi was a Byzantine. And then this verse was revealed. Okay? I want to highlight something that has to do with the Arabic. When I translated so it could make sense, I translated, and do not insult one another, and do not call each other by wicked names. The actual wording is not one another. The actual wording is do not insult yourselves. The literal wording. Anfusakum means yourselves. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and do not, let me go right straight to the ayah. وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, and do not insult yourselves. Why? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying do not insult yourselves? Frequently, you will see the believers referred to as one thing. One thing. So do not do this to yourselves. Right? And it changes the perspective. Right? When you say don't do something to someone, that's it's perceived one way. When you say don't do something to yourself, it's perceived in a very different way. Because then your understanding is, hold up, this thing is not hurting someone else, it's hurting me myself. Okay? And a point on that, there's a lot of hadith that mention the believers as being one united thing. A famous one is المسلمون كرجل واحد إن اشتكى عينه اشتكى كله وإن اشتكى رأسه اشتكى كله. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says the believers are like one person. If his eye hurts, then the whole body hurts. If his head hurts, then the whole body hurts. And there's another riwayah, another narration with similar wording where the Prophet ﷺ says the believers are like one body. If part of it hurts, they all hurt. Right? So when you're hurting your fellow brother, your fellow Muslim brother or Muslim sister with what you're saying, you're in fact hurting everyone. We're all together as one unit. The Prophet ﷺ describes the believer. And this is actually, this is an example of the Prophet ﷺ being clever, I guess you could say, with his wording. The word Muslim, I just want to talk about this real quick so you can understand. The word Muslim comes from the word salima, which means peace, right? Or safety. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Al-Muslim, the Muslim, man salima al-Muslimun min lisanihi wa yadihi. The Muslim is the one who the believers are safe. Salima, Muslim, same root from his tongue. He starts with the tongue and then his hand. From his tongue and his hand. That's one of the attributes of a Muslim, is that the other Muslims should feel safe around us. The word used that's translated into insult is telmizu. Telmizu has two meanings. It can mean to insult, like I mentioned, but it also can mean to pick out the deficiencies inside of a person. So it's not just insulting you, because you can insult someone and have no basis for your insult, right? Oh, he is a this. It could be just completely not true. You're just trying to hurt the person. Or you could be insulting them by pointing out something that's true. Oh, look at that crippled person, for example. You're highlighting something that's true about them. They're actually crippled. But you're making fun of it. So, telmizu, that's one of the meanings. So just so you, because I mentioned insult twice, the word. I didn't know what word exactly to use. But telmizu kind of means more of to point out the deficiencies within a person. And once again, there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, Al-mu'minu mir'atul mu'min wal-mu'minu akhul mu'min yakuffu alayhi dai'atuhu wa yahutuhu min wara'ihi. He describes the believer, he says, the believer is like a mirror to the other believer. So, the ulama say, what does this mean? Meaning that the believer sees deficiencies in other believers and should look into it themselves. Do I have those issues? When mu'min, and they're brothers. They're brothers. And mu'minu akhul mu'mini. The believer is the brother of the other believer. Yakufu. So he said, what does that mean? Yakufu alayhi day'atahu. He covers up his day'a. What does day'a mean? Day'a means literally destructions, his destructions. But here it means his faults. He covers up his faults. That's what brothers do. They cover up each other's weaknesses and strengthen each other. وَيَحُوطُهُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ. And yahutu means to encompass. Here it means to protect. And he protects him from behind, from people who try to go behind his back. Inshallah, we'll finish with this final ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ إِنَّ بَعْضَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ وَلَا تَحَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ. This, subhanAllah, I actually didn't realize this when I was writing the notes, but this hadith and this next verse, they just flow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, avoid being excessively suspicious. Indeed, some suspicion is sinful. And do not spy or backbite on one another. Would you like to eat the flesh of your fellow deceased brother? So fear God. Indeed, God is ever forgiving. There are three things the Prophet ﷺ said will be associated with his ummah. Superstition, being superstitious, envy, and what is called su' al-dhann, suspicion, being suspicious about other believers. And the Sahaba, they mentioned three solutions for this. The first one is, if you're suspicious, don't act on it. Make sure, do not act on suspicions. The second one, if you notice that you're feeling jealous, istighfar. And the third one, to avoid, if you're feeling suspicious, if you're feeling suspicious, to avoid consciously attempting to validate it. And it leads into what the next thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, where he says, do not spy on one another. We need to assume good of our fellow brothers and sisters. We need to assume good of our fellow brothers and sisters. And let's be honest, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then mentions backbiting. A lot of backbiting is not always on confirmed facts. A lot of times it's based on suspicions. I think so-and-so is doing such this and that because of something I saw. It's not directly related to the act, but you suspect it. It's that is so that's why these things they're all related. They're all related. And I want to finish with mentioning the three types of backbiting. They're all wrong, but each at different levels of being wrong. The first one is the word namima, right? Because we hear all these words and sometimes we're confused. What do these words mean? Namima. Namima is when you're passing on information from one person to another, but you didn't start it. You just heard it from one person, so you pass it on. You're the part of the chain of spreading. You're part of the spread, but you're not the origin. The second one is ghaiba, and that's the one that is referred to in the ayah. Ghaiba is when you're the source. You say something, right? You say something negative about someone, and it's true. But you say it behind their back. That's ghaiba. And the third one is buhtan, or ifk. That is the worst one. That is slander. That is when you say something behind someone's back, that is a lie. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection from namima and buhtan and ghaiba. And inshallah, before I want to do one reminder, because we're getting close to Ramadan and there is no tarawih, right? But that does not mean we stop doing our qiyam al-layl during Ramadan. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man qama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaban ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbih." He says, whoever stands for the length of Ramadan, stands with iman in his heart and seeking reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will have his previous sins forgiven from him. So make sure that we're still doing our qiyam. It's not restricted to the masjid. So أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.